3 years ago, Daniel Carter married a 72-year-old widow named Evelyn Brooks. To the casual observer, it appeared to be a quiet, dignified romance. Neighbors offered smiles and congratulations, imagining a bond formed by deep, mutual affection. Quiet, serious tone. Daniel never corrected them, but the truth was far more clinical. He didn't propose out of love. He agreed to the union because the temperatures were dropping, and he had spent the last several weeks wondering if he would survive another night in the back seat of his car. Their vows functioned as a mutual exchange of assets. Evelyn lived in a large, silent house on the edge of town, isolated by the passing of her husband and the absence of family. In exchange for the stability of a heated bedroom, Daniel provided a human presence to disrupt the weight of her loneliness. Their legal union was a calculated survival strategy, a contract signed by two strangers who recognized they could solve each other's most immediate deficits. By the time they met, Daniel's life was reduced to the space inside his old sedan. He lived in a state of constant, low-level panic, always listening for a knock on the glass or the sound of an approaching tow truck. This diagram maps the reality of their situation. Daniel lacked physical shelter, while Evelyn possessed a surplus of space, but a total deficit of psychological connection. Their needs intersected at a point where a shared life became the only logical solution for both. The arrangement was born from a simple act of observation. Evelyn noticed Daniel's car near the church for several days and eventually walked over with a cup of coffee. She offered a spare room, and as the months passed, she proposed a marriage of convenience to formalize the help they were providing one another. In those early days, the house remained a tool. To Daniel, it was a biological necessity. To Evelyn, it was a way to fill the silence with the sound of someone else moving through the hallways. Coexistence began with a series of rigid, polite boundaries. They ate in near silence, spoke only when necessary, and spent most of their time in separate rooms to avoid intruding on one another's privacy. However, the human mind struggles to maintain distance when sharing a confined space for months on end. Slowly, the guardedness that Daniel had carried from the streets began to soften. The silence between them shifted from a wall into a shared atmosphere. Their individual routines began to converge on the front porch. Every evening as the sun set, they found themselves sitting together, watching the light change across the yard. These sessions became a forum for their histories. Evelyn spoke about the world she had known decades earlier, and Daniel eventually found the words to describe the dreams he had abandoned during his years of struggle. As they exchanged these vulnerabilities, the physical structure of the house underwent a subtle change. It was losing its quality as a temporary, borrowed space. Evelyn began to offer small, unprompted gestures of care. She would leave a light on for him if he was out late, or prepare a meal when she noticed he had been working too many hours. One afternoon, she presented him with a cake to mark a birthday he had long since stopped acknowledging. On Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Daniel had been trapped at the very bottom, consumed by the physiological requirement for shelter. Over months of consistent safety and reliability, his brain began to move up the hierarchy. The absence of threat allowed him to finally inhabit the tier of love and belonging. This psychological shift changed the way he experienced the building. The walls provided a sense of absolute security that allowed Daniel's nervous system to finally settle. He was no longer reacting to an emergency. He was beginning to build a life. The transition reached its conclusion when the house finally stopped feeling like a transaction. It had become a sanctuary. On a cold winter morning, 3 years into their marriage, Daniel woke up to a house that had returned to a state of total, heavy silence. When he knocked on Evelyn's door, there was no answer. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was a disorienting experience. Daniel stood among a crowd of people who still viewed him as the grieving younger husband of a traditional marriage, unable to explain the complex, practical reality of what they had actually shared. At the cemetery, Daniel felt a familiar sense of exposure. He legally owned the massive house and everything inside it, Yet, without Evelyn, the property felt as hollow as the car he had lived in years before. The legal ownership of the building offered no comfort. Without the person who had transformed the space, the house had reverted to being nothing more than a structure of wood and stone. A few days later, the estate attorney handed Daniel a small wooden box bound in a faded blue ribbon. Daniel assumed the box contained the final remnants of their arrangement, perhaps financial records or the title to the property. Inside the box were hundreds of handwritten letters Daniel had sent to his mother years before her death. He had lost them during one of his many moves and assumed they were gone forever. Evelyn had tracked them down and kept them safe, knowing they were the only things he truly valued. At the bottom of the box was a note from Evelyn. She wrote that she always understood his initial search for walls to block the wind, but her real goal had been to give him a place where his heart could finally rest. She acknowledged that while he felt rescued by her home, he had provided her with an equal gift. By choosing to stay, he had ended the silence that had defined her final years, turning her house back into a family. A house is designed to shield the body from the elements, but it is the invisible ties of being known and cared for that shield the soul. Daniel sat in the quiet of the office and realized that he hadn't just inherited a building, he had been given the first home he ever truly had.